Is called LNG is Here, What's Next? And we're going to be starting in just a moment, as soon as everyone is at their seats. Hold off, I'll call you up. As people filter in, and thank you for bringing the noise level down, because it's time to get started. We have so much that is going to be talked about here. We need to preserve all that time for this. And so I'm going to launch into things. Our panel now, I'm so excited about this one. It's just been a long time in the making, and it's taken an incredible amount of coordination to make this unique duet of speakers that I will be sitting with come about. LNG is here, what next? It's a great question for British Columbia because LNG is here. The first cargo went from Kitimat, as Mayor Gurmuth of Kitimat knows, this summer. And already we've had in the double digits, I believe, of shipments. LNG is here, what next? My guests for this are Fauziah Marzuki, who's the global head of gas and LNG research and analysis at BloombergNEF, Bloomberg New Energy Finance. She joined BNEF in 2018 and is currently based in Singapore, but she's on a whirlwind tour, was able to make Victoria a stop on it. We're so appreciative of that. BNF's gas and LNG coverage includes regional and sectoral market outlooks, strategic insights, and short-term analytics and data-driven tools powered by the Bloomberg Terminal. And Fauziah currently manages gas teams all over the place: Beijing, Delhi, London, New York, Singapore, and Tokyo. Stay in your seat for a moment, Fauziah. Christy Clark is here. And also, Christy, stay in your seat. I don't need to introduce her, really. I mean, you all know she served as Premier of British Columbia from 2011 until 2017. And her signature achievement certainly is the establishment of the LNG industry in Canada. So let's give a big round of applause to these two guests as they come up. Well, you know, I don't think I'm needed as a moderator here. I think I could just sort of start this conversation off and let her rip. But I do want to thank you both for being here. It is such a special place for you, Christy. It's Victoria, it's UBCM. These are things that you've been involved in so much. What does it mean to say that LNG is here? What's next?
Well, for me, the first shipment of LNG from British Columbia was the product. I think it was the proudest day. I wasn't in government anymore, but it was my proudest day as someone who's been in government. When we were going to build, when we started the LNG projects in 2011, started raising investment, we said there was going to be 100,000 new jobs created as a result of LNG. And we thought we were going to have 5 projects up and operating. Everybody made fun of us. Mike Smith, Vaughn Palmer, everybody thought it was a joke. The NDP were telling us that we were idiots and liars. And from the first project that we did, first project that British Columbia did, LNG Canada, just that one project, 100,000 jobs were created across the province and across the country. So it was a huge day, and it gives me hope that if we could get one through, even after the New Democrats got back into government, we might be able to get the other 4.
Fauziah, let me turn to you and ask you, as a neutral, impartial outsider, here you are right into the thick of it.
I'm very.
What does it mean to the BloombergNEF LNG and gas desk in Singapore when you see this happen in British Columbia?
Finally. Sorry. Hello? Finally, I think it was actually a really happy moment for me as well. Christy, we were talking about it. Before I joined Bloomberg, I was actually with one of the original investors in that first phase of Canadian.
Petronas.
Yes, I was, yeah. So it was, we were actually, I was part of the team looking at which projects to invest in, and I remember you. We were, you were really supportive of the projects. Sadly, it didn't actually fall through 10 plus years ago. So it was, when I saw that first cargo, my team was already preparing the strategic insight for why this is a great day for Canada for our first cargo. So it was really exciting for us, and I'm happy to talk more about it.
Well, okay, let's talk about that. So let's start with this. British Columbia has, if we doubled the amount of gas we were extracting in Canada, in British Columbia alone, not including even Alberta, we would, and just doubled it, we would have 160 years of natural gas to be able to ship to the world. Nobody will be using natural gas in 160 years. We got a lot of that stuff. So we have just finished a decade of what I would argue, in a nonpartisan way, of active economic suppression through the overregulation of our business environment on the part of the federal government. So governments have changed. We are now looking at, hopefully, a government that's a lot more business friendly and open to exporting natural gas. When you look back at your time at Petronas, and we were doing Pacific Northwest LNG, do you say to yourself do you think it would have been possible to get it going in that previous environment? And do you think that this new environment is going to be one that will help us find investment around the world from countries like Petronas or a country like Malaysia once again?
Sure. Okay, so let's talk about what the ecosystem was like back then. So definitely one of the pain points for the LNG developers back then was the lengthy regulatory approvals. That was definitely a pain point. But it coincided, unfortunately, with a number of other things. It was at a time when oil prices were coming down. Now, when oil prices come down, the oil and gas majors tend to pull back their investments, regardless of how commercial and how wonderful they are. And also, it was around the time when the Australian projects were also coming about. And the Australian projects had a little bit more of a strategic advantage due to their already producing assets there. So they had, let's call it street cred. They had that reputation as being a reliable LNG suppliers, whereas Canada was new on the block, right? So it was a number of things kind of regrettably working against the Canadian projects at the time. Now, I think what's changed since then is, of course, the federal and state government's sort of more willingness to expedite these projects, shorten that time. It is a different situation now because one thing that we do need to be mindful of is that we might be coming into a situation where there's a whole bunch of LNG as well in the market now, or coming into the market. So this is where I think Canada specifically, with regards to the development of the LNG projects, needs to actually learn from the experiences of other developers. I actually do think it might have been a little bit of a blessing that Canada did not actually develop all 5 of those projects at the same time, because that's what happened to Australia. They developed nearly a dozen projects at the exact same time, and that led to absolute cost blowouts. They did not manage the timelines of all of these developments. So you imagine it is already a remote location, it is already a sort of limited skilled workforce for this, and you slate a whole bunch of projects all together at the same time. That's just not a good recipe. So to an extent, I do believe that this more cautious, phased approach that Canada can be taking with their LNG projects is actually going to strategically position Canada to succeed.
So you think that the investors out there, and they were every major oil and gas country in the world, they felt a little burned, but they're over it. They will still invest in Canada.
I believe so. The major oil and gas companies, of course, every major would be different. They would be looking for the most cost competitive projects, so we can talk about competitiveness of the Canadian projects. Pretty much every single Japanese buyer, every single Korean, Taiwanese by a Chinese buyer was invested or had some kind of offtake agreement from the Australian LNG projects. Equally so, pretty much every single major has some kind of offtake from US LNG projects now, and also same with the Asian buyers. So I do believe there is an appetite for these buyers to have Canadian LNG, and I think that is going to be the thing that brings these projects forward. The thing that I think we need to be mindful of with Canadian LNG project development is resisting a temptation for a develop all at one go, all at once kind of strategy.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we're not going to end up with a whole bunch all at once. I'm just, every day, one more maybe. So the investment climate hopefully has changed. When we look, I always look at, I'm looking at what's going on in the United States, the aggressive American stance that they've taken in reordering the trade environment around the world. Canada seems to offer some advantages as a place to invest. We are governed by the rule of law. English is the language of business. We have huge amount of resources, and we are not the Americans. So, just like we are working hard now suddenly to reorient our economy and diversify our markets, can we hope that people in Asia might look at Canada and see it as an opportunity to diversify away from dependence on the United States as well?
100%. So let me unpack a little bit about US LNG investments, particularly from an Asian buyer's perspective. US LNG is not actually cheap. If I were to actually calculate the cost, the contract price of US LNG, so that's your Henry Hub plus a fixed charge for the liquefaction facility plus your shipping, actually, based on current prices, that is at the higher end of a standard oil indexed Brent crude oil supply contract from one of your Middle Eastern producers. So if it's not that cost competitive, why are the Asian buyers still buying US LNG? They're buying it for their flexibility. So US LNG, the attractiveness of it is not about its competitiveness. It is about the business model that they've sort of propagated, which is, if you don't need the LNG, you can cancel it. That's fine. It doesn't have to be such a long-term commitment with very limited flexibility. Flexibility is not free. You must pay for flexibility. You pay for reliability. It is a service, right? So they are willing to pay for that flexibility. You take the case of Japan. Japan is overcontracted with LNG. If you were to take all of the cumulative LNG contracts that every single Japanese company has signed, it is well in excess of what the LNG demand is projected to be for Japan. But they pay for that flexibility, and they keep signing these projects, one, to diversify and send it to other emerging markets to support their own corporations that are building gas power projects, gas infrastructure in other developing markets, South Asia, Southeast Asia, where they can channel that. And if anything ever happens to Japan again, like an unfortunate natural disaster, they have the flexibility to bring that LNG home, and they will not be subject to suppliers' needs. So they're paying for that flexibility. So when you pay for that kind of flexibility, if you look at the numbers, you would be perhaps surprised that a lot of US LNG does not actually go to Asia. It is signed by Asian customers, but most of the time what they're doing is that they're swapping it out, they're optimizing their portfolio. It doesn't actually come in large numbers to Asia. So where I see Canada's advantage is, I think I'll know it is your Pacific Basin positioning, where you can actually be that reliable, stable supply source in the Pacific. And I think the situation that we're in now is that the traditional Asian suppliers, like Malaysia, Indonesia, are running out of LNG. It is coming down. So to, what I'd say, backfill that supply that's needed in the Pacific, that's where Canada is going to play a big role. Because the US LNG, the way the trade flows are shifting now, it's largely going to stay in the Atlantic, particularly if Europe is going to continue buying a whole lot more LNG with phasing out Russian gas pipelines.
I see a lot of news reports in Bloomberg about how China is moving away from fossil fuels really much more quickly than anyone had anticipated. They've been very busy working on clean energy solutions or cleaner energy solutions. We've always worked on the assumption that China is going to need our natural gas in greater quantities basically forever. Should we start questioning that assumption?
To a degree, yes. My analysts, I think, have a headache every time they need to revise their forecast for Chinese LNG demand, and we haven't been revising it up, I'll say that. We've been revising it down, almost steadily down. Now that's for a number of reasons. That is for the economic headwinds and all, so it's just not growing at the rate that we expected. Also, LNG to the Chinese is the balancer. It's the marginal source of supply. Fundamentally, a lot of their gas demand is still met by domestic production. Next is pipeline supply from Russia, Central Asia. LNG is just the top up, right? So that's actually a really big swing for the Chinese. A reason why we've also been cautious with LNG demand in China, it's still big because it's China, but as a percentage, they are highly price sensitive. And this is probably more price sensitive than we actually anticipated. Yes, they're doing their coal to gas switching, and there's that potential. But you take, for example, Chinese consumption for gas in the power sector. Yes, it's big when you look at it from absolute terms compared to other countries, but it is small, very, very, very small when compared to their whole system. So yes, it is a potential, but it is a highly price-sensitive one, and we really have to come back to cost competitiveness. They'll buy it if it's cheap and competitive, but with recent developments, especially with Europe and Russian gas, things that are going on in the news right now, they just said they want to potentially build a huge pipeline. If that pipeline does happen, 100% that is going to cut LNG demand for the Chinese.
Now, on either side of Canada are two other potential markets, but probably the one that is most concerned about cost competitiveness above all is the potential in the Indian market. Mm-hmm. Do you see that market growing for LNG? It would make, sadly our relations with India have been frayed recently, but look like they're getting starting to improve again. Should we can we make LNG export to India a business for Canada and a method of repairing and strengthening our relationship with India?
Only if you can offer it really, really cheaply. And I say that and I say that because from a transport perspective, Canada does not have an advantage in that sense. Where the Indian players have been buying the most or striking up a lot of deals are actually with the Middle Eastern producers. Now, from a location perspective, you can't beat that. Also, some of the recent, there are smaller things as well which kind of don't get realized. But for example, Indian buyers have been signing up with the UAE LNG projects. Now, between the two countries, actually, there are tax breaks. So when an Indian buyer actually buys from the UAE, they actually pay no import taxes on it. So these little things do actually make a difference. So and that G2G relationship has definitely helped promote Indian buying of LNG. Once again, in India, gas is small compared to their entire energy mix. Their target is 15% gas in their energy mix by 2030. Most people feel that is actually already pretty ambitious. It is definitely growing. They've invested a lot over the years in their city gas distribution in order to enable access by the refineries, by the smaller industries, by their transport system to use compressed natural gas in their vehicles. So it's definitely growing, absolutely growing. But I think from Canada's position, I think that's not where Canada's cost competitiveness is going to be. Now, of course, striking larger deals for sort of more trade relations, I think, of course, that's great. That would kind of function at a higher level, but from just the actual commercial, sort of the commercial economics of it, probably less of a thing. I think where Canada should be focusing is still that core North Asia, and I would actually highlight Southeast Asia as a growing market.
It is tragic that India is, instead of going to LNG or other cleaner sources of energy, they are just focusing on, well, not just, but they are primarily focused on increasing their use of coal. I mean, that is really a tragic outcome from this. And I always thought of LNG as a way for Canada to try and ameliorate the impact of coal on the climate, but also on the shortening of millions of people's lives in Southeast Asia, Asia, and South Asia. So I'm sad to hear that, Fauziah, I have to say. Now, if India, I mean, India was invested in the Petronas-led Pacific Northwest project, as you know. Has something changed between now and then in terms of their perception of Canada as a market with which to deal?
I think they haven't, again, because a lot of the demand that they're anticipating has already been signed up by large Middle Eastern volumes. They haven't actually really thought about that many other investments. Usually the way Indian companies would invest in LNG projects, there'll be a handful of the state-owned entities or partially state-owned entities that actually just take a small 10-15% stake in the project just to get the offtake volume, and it's usually to bring over to their refineries. But once again, because it's a refinery and it has the flexibility to take different products, if it's not price competitive with naphtha and other types of products that they can run in their refinery, it's not necessarily going to be competitive to them. Also, what I'd say is previous Indian company investment in LNG projects, they kind of did go through a thing where they wanted to sort of expand their upstream capabilities and portfolio. So these were very strategic investments as well. But right now, I think there's a lot with regards to it's got to be cheap, it's got to be competitive, and it's got to make sense for them. I want to talk on coal for just to your previous point. Yes, India is going to keep running coal for a while in their power sector, and gas in power in India is also less of a thing. Sometimes you turn it on if they have a particularly hot summer and they need to actually increase that generation, but they have domestic production, and of course, why import when you have much cheaper resources at home? And without sort of that larger, broader climate narrative, it's very difficult to kind of wedge that out of the system. However, the transition away from coal really is a story about those countries or those economies that had to import coal, and then you want to replace that with LNG. Or it's a story about traditionally gas-based economies that are running out of gas and now need to supplement it with LNG. And this is where I think in particular other markets in South Asia and particularly Southeast Asia are the ones where I think there's a lot more potential. I don't know, Christy, if you're aware, but Petronas themselves are importing LNG now.
Stuart, I think you wanted to say something.
I do have a question. Just thank you. I don't want to interrupt this great conversation, but one question. Well, I have to. Going back to what's the pace? The Australia example, you said it was crushed into a short time frame, spiraling costs. You had these $30 billion Gorgon costs and everything. But in North America, we have this integrated continental gas distribution system. You can see Canadian gas flow to the Gulf Coast for pennies, and there the Americans get to monetize it because they've built 8 giant LNG plants in the time that Canada's been thinking about, or getting to where we are now. Isn't it a little different? I mean, if we've got Silesium, Cedar LNG, Phase 2 LNG Canada, wood fiber LNG, that sounds like a pretty supportable and desirable thing to be doing in the short term right away.
No, absolutely. I think all of these projects, each project still has a lot of commercial value, and I think they all need to be supported. This kind of comes back to the, let's just make sure it's not all in, all together, all at one time, because each project has its very strong merits. No, they wouldn't get built, right? All of them have their commercial value and will bring value to Canada and to all the investors and to the First Nations that actually back all of these projects. What I think we need to think about in that ecosystem is how is Canadian LNG going to compete with all of the other resources, right? So when you look at the US LNG projects, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is just like, it's a whole bunch of terminals. Like, it's a lot, it is a lot of gas. And for as much gas as the US has, I don't know if they really can supply all that gas to these into these US LNG projects. I'll share a little nugget of insights from that the team in the US have actually done. So if we actually look at all of the US LNG export projects that have already FID'd, so these are going to happen by 2030, the amount of feed gas that's actually going to be required for these US LNG projects, it will actually become the second largest gas consuming sector in the US, above industry and ResCom, just behind power. And they'll even be a little bit short by our projections by 2030. A little bit short. It is the second largest consumer, and this is the US. I can't see a situation where this does not raise domestic prices in order to actually unlock more of their shale gas resources. So where you see that, and where I think actually Canada is really strategically placed, it's just like more than a lot of other gas producers out there, you have flexibility in the evacuation of your gas. You have gas resources, but LNG is not the only way to monetize it. So you were saying, there was conversation about, okay, yes, Canada is a little bit of a price taker with regards to what it sells into the US market, but negotiate harder. You can actually get Asian prices or European prices. There have actually been some recent deals where US developers are striking with Canadian gas suppliers for 2030, that 26, 27, 2030 timeframe, and they're getting an international benchmark link as well. And that flexibility is great for Canada in terms of you have your LNG projects that are all kind of commercially stable, and they will sell, they will bring that value, and we know that's kind of, safe and secure. But then you have this opportunity to take advantage. Let's just say it's a scenario that the US doesn't have enough gas for these huge LNG projects that they've signed all these contracts for, and prices go up, and then you can make more money by sending it to them. Yes, physically the molecule may not load in the Gulf, but that your interconnected gas network actually really plays an advantage to Canadian gas producers, not just for those who supply to the Pacific, Midwest, and your Northeast, and we can talk about the data center stuff too. There's going to be a lot of demand in the US for this, so projects, your data centers, everything. There's a strategic opportunity there as well to diversify.
I thought you might want to say something
sure.
else.
Well, let me build on that. Negotiate harder. That's a great phrase to remember.
You really should.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I've met your wife, Stu.
Yes. Now I've lost my question entirely. So when you're sitting around, wherever you sit around things in Bloomberg and Singapore, are people saying, you know, that Canadian gas and LNG, their social license and their reconciliation and participation of the Indigenous peoples in these projects and their great environmental standards are so great. And are people talking about that at work for you?
I think they will. Right now, you've still only got one project, and maybe not all of the framework is there yet, but I think there is great desire and demand to have responsibly sourced LNG. And I think we really shouldn't underestimate that, especially for the markets that have no other alternative to get to net zero. So again, once again, I turn to the Asian buyers who they have made their peace. They cannot fully they can't electrify everything. They will still need gas. It is a thing. So they need to find other means to actually meet their climate goals, right? So be it offsetting or whatnot. But the value in having a robust, transparent governance framework that allows projects or buyers to really see, okay, what is the emissions intensity of this LNG compared to other projects, is something I believe buyers are willing to pay for. Not all of them, not all of them. Some care more than others on this, but I'll take the example of some of the Taiwanese buyers and Japanese buyers. For each and every cargo that's still being delivered by their traditional suppliers, they are increasingly asking their suppliers, tell me what the life cycle emissions intensity of this cargo is. I need to start offsetting it. My downstream customers, my city gas distributors are asking me what that intensity is. I need to report it. If you make their life easier by having transparent reporting on your emissions and actually also safeguarding it with robust methane regulations, that is going to be an advantage. If in the U.S. There's been recent talk about the methanes regulation in the EU and whether the U.S. might be at a disadvantage because of the current sort of administration's view on methane emissions and whether it's a thing or not. The US LNG developers are still on their own trying to come up with emissions and emissions accounting frameworks on their own because they know how important it is for their buyers. And I think something that's done in Canada that's strategic, that is robust, would absolutely play to a competitive
Now,
advantage.
there must be, I'm making an assumption here. Isn't in their calculus also issues with the dependability of the Americans, the worry that that a country will be more dependent on the United States rather than less, given the tumult that they've created in the world in terms of trading relationships and all that. Isn't that an advantage for Canada? And I mean, Europe obviously is thinking hard about all these issues. Is there a hope in hell that we can get LNG, Canadian LNG, to Europe to try and relieve their dependence, both on the US, but principally relieve their dependence on the Russian market?
So Europe is trying to ban Russian LNG as well. Right now, Russian LNG makes up about 10% of the LNG that is supplied to Europe. That is not insignificant. It is very likely going to be replaced by US LNG, so that is swapping one dependency for another. Now, the European system acts in a slightly different way, and I think this comes to a little bit more of the intricacies of how the market is priced there in Europe. For Europe, the price of LNG is whatever the European wholesale price, it's whatever the TTF, the European benchmark price is. That's what sellers sell into the European market for. So in that sense, they are supply agnostic, if you like, and there's not much of an opportunity for them to diversify from a commercial perspective. Unlike the Asian markets, where the Asian markets don't have that kind of liberalized gas market. Some are getting there, but largely no. So when an Asian buyer when they say they want to diversify their LNG supply, yes, it's for sort of location, it's geographical, but it is also about the pricing benchmarks to a degree. one of the big reasons that Asian buyers bought so much US LNG was because, oh, finally, something else other than crude oil exposure. I get a Henry Hub exposure now. So where, again, I think Canada can position itself, it's one more diversification for these big buyers, and it's on a benchmark that gas prices are cheap, and we kind of go and we go back to that. So relieving that reliance on US LNG is one for Asian buyers, but I kind of come back to it's not actually not that much US LNG actually makes it out to Asia anyways. It is about the price that they pay. So that diversification does come from what the Canadian projects can offer in terms of a different model in that sense.
No, go ahead, Stu.
This morning, we heard some news from the Business Council of BC. I don't know if you were in the room yet, but Hira over here gave us some news that I think a lot of people looked at with concern. You know, we have some fiscal headwinds, to say the least, in British Columbia. I wonder, with your experience looking at other entrants to the LNG export markets, other countries, whether it's Qatar, Australia, USA, has there been an economic impact that's been experienced there that has been beneficial to the growth of those economies, to the stability of whatever the relevant metrics are?
Sure. Economically helps. I think the thing too that I'm always cautious about with LNG exports is the domestic demand in that country. I think there is no shortage of countries that became LNG exporters and suddenly had to turn around and keep that gas at home for domestic demand, or had to, curb LNG exports in one way or other. So, and I feel that's where I think for so many people in this room, domestic gas consumption and the affordability of it, I do believe should be paramount, because without that, your exports will mean so much less. If it comes at a cost of your homes, you're powering your system, supporting your grid, adding reliability to your hydro, to your hydro-dependent power system, that should be front and center, which is why I say each project, LNG project that gets developed, will have their own commercial merit. But when we look at the entire landscape, we do need to make sure that there's a balance with ensuring domestic demand is met, while then strategically finding those buyers for LNG exports. So for the economic considerations, the worst thing that can happen is skyrocketing gas prices because you export too much, which is why, again, a phased approach is important.
Now,
So
Christy,
Vancouver should probably unban natural gas. I'm just going to say, I've got a gas stove and I love it.
What do you think? And a quick word before you continue. If you've got a question, Simon here will be roaming with the mic. We're down to the last few minutes here, so please, Christy, carry on.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to get that out there.
Hi, thanks so much for really thoughtful tour of Canadian LNG and what it's going to mean and is meaning for global markets. While we have you, Fauziah, I just wanted to ask a little bit, and I think this is relevant for Canadian supply into Asian markets. If you could talk just a little bit about LNG storage in Asia and bunkering in Asia, and how both of those are, I gather from the last LNG 2023 that took place in Vancouver, it sounds like those are really leading and developing aspects that will, of course, have a huge impact on price. Mm-hmm. So just wondering if you can maybe speak to those a little bit from the perspective of if there's a West Coast potential still for Canadian LNG to Asia.
I love that question. Thank you so much for asking it. So let me just paint a picture. If you were to look at all the gas consumption scenarios from all of your research house insights like BloombergNEF, you look at the IEA, you look at ExxonMobil's Energy Outlook or Shell's, everybody does agree, okay, gas consumption in buildings, flat, reducing a little bit. Gas consumption in industry, yeah, it's going to grow because you're going to be replacing coal with heat. You're going to use it for petrochemicals. Gas in transport is one that also very consistently is a growth factor in all of these scenarios. Where they diverge the most is actually in the power sector. Some go like this, some go like this, depending on your view of the power sector. So that's why I love this question, because I see gas and LNG playing a huge role in transport. Yes, in, again, absolute terms, it might be small compared to consumption in industry and power, but there are almost very, very, very few other cost-competitive replacements for the shipping industry. So LNG bunkering is something I see tremendous potential with, and I'm less confident about green molecules because that requires an entire infrastructure update. Also, I am very hopeful with gas's role to provide peaking services. So this is actually, smaller liquefaction facilities across the country that can store gas and liquefied LNG and can actually be turned on immediately. You really actually help the volatility in your prices as well, because if you're pulling from the pipelines, which are already congested to a degree, you add so much volatility. But if you can actually liquefy it and strategically store it throughout the country when you have a cold winter, whether it be in Ontario or wherever, and it actually starts to impact BC's prices, you have that flexibility. So I think this is kind of where I come back to domestic consumption of it as well, together with exports. It's a whole recipe that I think actually just works really well together. Ensuring domestic demand, shoring up that consumption and its use to decarbonize some hard-to-abate sectors, particularly be it your use in industry. You already are actually here in BC, your Tilbury bunkering facility is actually sort of at the forefront for ferries and early adoption. This is going to be a thing. A lot of ships are going to be fueled by LNG in the future, and if Vancouver can, other of your ports can actually position themselves for LNG bunkering, I do see that as a strategic advantage. Now, you will not be able to rival Singapore in terms of the volume and in terms of the sheer traffic of ships that pass by there, but you absolutely can leverage it as the North America Pacific transit route, right? So, and also your ability to even store smaller parcels of LNG for Pacific Island needs. A lot of islands will need these smaller power plants, and they're not huge volumes. They can't sign these big volumes to underwrite huge LNG developments. But if the LNG project developers are nimble enough with the right ecosystem, you can actually capture this market, which I think has really great potential.
I think Tilbury LNG had a deal with Hawaii. I was trying to get on a trade mission to Hawaii, actually. And then I don't think the deal ended up, or they didn't invite me. I don't know what happened with that. But so just, it sounds like a super political question, but I don't really mean it that way. I just kind of want to get a sense of where Canada sits in the world when it comes to the way we manage project development. Because a lot of people would say Canada is in the bottom 10 or bottom 5 of democratic countries in terms of its regulatory and tax burden that it puts on companies that are trying to develop resource projects, but specifically LNG. What's your view of that? Are we in the bottom 10? Are we in the bottom 5? Are we in the top 10 in terms of the quality and length of time that of our regulatory process?
Specifically the regulatory process?
Yes.
Or just the whole?
Well, we can move to taxes next if you want, but let's start with regulatory.
Again, I believe there have been improvements, but once again, it's only been one commercial project thus far. So we'll kind of have to see how the other projects are going to actually progress and how fast those can be. And they're actually smaller, but they are taking some some time. So I do believe that from a buyer's perspective and from the industry's perspective, it is definitely sort of a more stable regulatory environment to operate in. Where I believe maybe some clarity can be given for investors in these projects is your climate goals, actually, is your sustainability regulations, how are your methane, how are you going to manage methane? Are you going to have an emissions cap or not? Are you going to have, sort of more national carbon pricing? This clarity on these frameworks actually do go a long way with regards to ensuring that your buyers feel that it is a conducive work environment. It is a conducive business environment. It absolutely is better than some operating ones. But maybe I'll take a page from what the Australians are going through right now. Similar operating environment, if you like, similar challenges as well to a degree for the projects. The biggest thing that the Australians are concerned about right now, and the buyers of Australian LNG, is actually, oh my goodness, are they actually going to pull back? Are they actually going to pull back the gas and not let me export? Again, why I bring up the ensuring the domestic consumption needs are secure is absolutely paramount. Now, I don't think you guys will have the same problem as the Australians because you have a whole bunch more gas and your infrastructure is a lot more developed in that sense, and you do have that diversification in terms of export routes, but it is something that, I'd say it's what investors are thinking about with regards to Canadian investments.
We're just about out of time. Last thoughts, Fauziah, and then Christy.
Negotiate harder. You can actually get more for your you can get more for your gas and LNG. I think just ensuring that these are also very one thing that I think a lot about, and I know here in BC you think a lot about, is about your grid. If you're looking at these, we didn't talk about this, but if you're looking at these LNG facilities to be powered by your grid or by your hydropower, that investment in grid stability, this is 4 huge loads of industrial, power consumption that are potentially going to be needed. Upgrading and making sure those power systems are actually reliable first and foremost to be able to handle this, I think is also something really that we need to think about. And I'll give the example of Texas, where there is one project that is connected to the ERCOT grid, the Texas grid, and that thing trips probably more often than not, and you do not want an LNG plant tripping because when that happens, you have to flare gas, and we don't like that. So what's great about the LNG Canada project is that it does use grid power for ancillary services. Now that's great. Now that we can move the needle more on creating lower carbon footprint LNG, and I think strategically, I think if Canada can plan for that, for these projects, stagger the project developments, stagger how you're going to use your skilled labor force to develop all of these things, make sure the operating environment and the grid infrastructure that's required for all of it all lines up. I think it's going to be really well played for Canada.
Well, I will just, when I used to come to UBCM and meet with mayors, my staff would always say, oh my God, she is going to tell them, yes, I will build your hospital. And so, if you're from Haida Gwaii or Prince George or Victoria, and you met with me, I probably devoted a lot of public money to your hospital. And when I look at the list of things that the government spent money on between 2011 and 2017, hospitals were the number 2. Number 1 was transmission capacity and dam capacity. John Hart, Juanita, Micah. I mean, you name. We did. There was billions and billions of dollars that we put into that to support LNG and other energy needs. But it was an example, though, I think, of how government can make great investments on behalf of citizens. Somebody said good debt and bad debt earlier. I don't believe in good debt, I don't believe it. I do believe in good debt. I don't believe in bad debt. But those kinds of projects where we invest in economic growth that have resulted in projects like LNG are really vitally important. So I just wanted to say thanks, Stu. Thank you, Fauziah. Very, very nice to meet you in real life. And to all of my many friends here, I can't believe that so many of you have outlasted me in politics. I feel like I should have gone into municipal politics instead of federal. I might still have a job now. But thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and thank you to ResourceWorks for putting this on.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.